welcome to, what is this, guys? Episode 3 of
Yes,
the
sir.
Decode podcast.
Rev 1.3.
Daniel Stanphill here from Aurora Boardworks once again, and here with my buddies Sean Kincaid and Elias Malfavon Jr.
Hello.
We have a bit to talk about this week. Probably going to try to keep it to one main topic because I know we can be long-winded on these things. So I think the topic of the week for us was going to be NSMD versus SMD, right? So solder mask defined versus non-solder mask defined. And I think based on all of our joint conversations about this subject, we should probably just immediately turn the floor over to Sean because he was the expert on this. So, Sean, what's your interpretation of SMD versus NSMD? I think is the obvious place to start.
I wish people could fully get the gauge of like how many text messages and phone calls and level of rage I have had about this subject.
Yes, please start us from the beginning. Where was your, like, literally the first time we talked about this? What was the pain point for you? Why was it so upsetting?
You sent me a photo of a board and you said, here's some non-solder masks. And then you said some solder masks. Yeah, defined. Throw that word in there.
It's an important word. It's kind of the whole point behind the term.
Minor details here.
Yeah, semantics. Go on.
I mean, I read non-solder mask, right? And when you're manufacturing a board, it's like earlier today, you know, would you ever put Hazel on a 1005, right? And if that's what the customer wants, that's what you give them, right? And then so you say non-solder mask, and I see solder mask, that's solder mask, right? Like I don't, either you don't want it there or you want it there. And you have to imagine there's film, right? And the film is either going to expose that pad or not. It's not going to leave like a little gap unless you're off registration. So for me, it was crazy. And then you start looking at the underneath part of it too, where it's actually connected. And so for me personally, it was a nightmare to try to grasp my brain around the word solder mask defined, non-solder mask defined, and then you guys saying there's actually mask over the copper, and it was like 8 different things. And from my perspective, it's just keep it simple, man. There's either mask or there's no mask, But I get it.
But I mean, were you ostensibly you were producing both varieties of boards, right? I mean, this
like
is stuff
I said,
that you would have been.
It's whatever you want. Either you want it there, or you don't. And if it's there and it's not supposed to be, it's a problem. And if it's not there and it's supposed to be, it's a problem, right? So that's what I'm looking for when you're making a board.
But if you don't immediately know what the difference is based on the term, I mean, what in the specs tells you to build it one way or the other?
The actual Gerber file of the mask and then copper plane. So that's it. That's what, and you got to think like when you're manufacturing, you're just stacking layer on layer on layer on layer and as exposing. And you either want it there or you don't. Either light's going to shine and bake it on there or it's not, And honestly, Daniel, without and looking, I still would probably be confused to this day looking at that example you gave. And I know it was a challenging example, right? Like it was a challenging one, and everyone was like, "Wow, look at that! I can't believe they put 2 different defines, in the same IC chip, right?" But I still
actually the picture you're talking about was a post on LinkedIn I did, and the IC actually had all 8 leads were different definition. That some of them were 100% solder mask defined, some of them were 100% non-solder mask defined, some of them were partially on top, some were partially on bottom, some were on 3 sides. It was just every single one had a slightly different definition. So just thinking about the way the stencil's supposed to align with the pads and trying to get good gasketing around it, you want to get that sealed around the aperture. The aperture is sealed right around the pads in the same way. And if they're all at kind of different planes right around, like there's different heights right around each pad, that can lead to sometimes you can have some issues trying to print that.
Right. So for the listening audience, in the case that NSMD or SMD is kind of a foreign term for you, I mean, in its simplest terms, what defines the bounds of the pad, right? Is it the copper itself, or is the copper larger than the actual opening in the solder mask, right? And I find it really interesting to kind of go through a list of the advantages and disadvantages of each technique, and neither one of them is perfect, right? And maybe that's an answer for why you see a mix in so many assemblies, but
And why there was a lot of discussion on my post about it wasn't clear cut that, oh, you always do it this way. In this case, you always do it. No, there was differing opinions and different approaches that people take. There wasn't just unanimous, one approach.
Yeah, each one of those individual opinions was 100% right.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of there's just no once you've determined your approach, it's the only right one. So I think that's why that was such a dynamic and explosive post, because there's people are just so passionate about it, right?
Which added to the confusion of trying to learn what the hell are you talking about, right? Like either
Sure.
there's mask or there's no mask. I don't, and then so, then you have all these different rules. And I talked to my engineer, he says he prefers NSMD, and after he told me why, it makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I told you too. And what was his reason before I go out on a limb?
It gives more leeway for paste, a better chance of actually pasting onto the pad, right? Because if you have anything off registration on your mask, that might bleed into the pad itself. One has to be kind of dialed in, and the other one gives a little bit more leeway to the manufacturer.
Yeah, and I would also say, we typically are going to have a 10% reduction from the, size of the pad to the paste itself within that 10%. So if you've got a non-solder mask defined pad and you've got, it's essentially a copper pad on an island, right? The edges of the pads are very clearly if it's like a Enig finish and you've got, real high quality boards, you're going to see like perfectly square edges on the sides of those pads, and that, I don't know, that just makes a big difference when you're trying to.
Yeah, and another benefit of that as well is, those edges of the pad that you referenced, that's solderable surface, right? So now you can wet around the pad, right, on the sides of the pad, even though the height is not great, but that's available surface for wet.
And that 10% reduction now, if you don't have mask defining the pad, but you're 10% inside of a standalone copper pad, now if you have slight shrink or twist or any deviation in the fabrication, hopefully your aperture is still going to be pretty well centered inside the pad overall, even if it shifts a little bit one way or the other. So it just seems to me, in my experience so far, it's been easier to get consistent, good results when you don't have to worry about the mask at all.
Sure. Now, let's bring up BGAs, for example. There's a pretty big list of why you'd want to use SMD in the case of a BGA. Like, for instance, the mask kind of creates a mechanical bonding point, right? So it makes the pads less susceptible to lifting during rework or otherwise, right? So that's one of the advantages for BGAs that I've read about and learned about it with SMD.
What causes that though?
What causes the pad to be removed?
No, to prevent that actual like lifting force.
Well, if you imagine that, the pad itself is enveloped on all sides by the solder mask, right? So it kind of creates a seal, kind of creates an envelope that is containing the pad mechanically a bit, right?
And it's forcing that solder then to go to that. Am I wrong?
Um, I'm I'm getting to more along the lines of it's keeping that pad from being removed during the rework process, right? If you had to rework a BGA and you had to remove
Because
that
the solder
BGA,
mask keeps it held down. It's good.
right?
Okay, I understand. The solder mask defining the pad actually kind of secures the pad underneath it instead of the edges being exposed and being able to lift more easily. They're kind of masked down.
Bingo,
Like an envelope or something.
like an
Like some
envelope.
tape, like mask, like solder mask almost.
Profound.
I love the brain transformation where it's envelope, tape, like mask, like solder mask. Daniel's brain.
Like he just discovered it. He just
Yeah,
invented it.
you can thank me for that one, guys. You were going to read some definitions or something, weren't you, Elias? You were starting to? Like you had examples or definition, a list of something?
Sure. So solder mask defined, right? Definition in SMD pads. A layer of solder mask covers a portion of the underlying copper pad, creating a smaller solder mask opening, right? So basically the copper pad is larger than nominal, and the solder mask is what determines the actual nominal. And in NSMD, it differs by leaving a gap between the copper pad and the solder mask, exposing the entire pad. So the pad's etched to nominal. So I'm interested in Sean's take on that because he's obviously done PCB manufacturing. Which of those is more difficult to accomplish? Hitting a nominal size with a pure etch process like a NSMD, or hitting a nominal with solder mask and solder mask defined?
Irrelevant. They're
Well,
they're separate
No, we're-
layers. They're separate layers. Like that's part of my problem. That's my thing is like you when you get a
But
Gerber
it's a
file,
different end result. Like,
it is, but that's because light was either exposed to it or not.
let me rephrase. Which is more accurate? Exposing and developing solder mask or etching?
Solder mask.
It's more accurate.
It depends, man, because you can
which
right
has
like
led
you
to more rework or rejects for you.
mask 100%.
Well, there you
But
go.
that was because we were using a camera system, and the etcher is like you run these like coupon tests almost on every panel where you can actually see where the lines are being etched, and after you've run it for so long, and you know the pH of your etchant, and you know your temperature of your bath, and you have your speed set a certain way, it's kind of hard to over etch as long as those are all maintained at a certain level. It really is. Obviously, it happens. The thinner the trace, right? The smaller the area, the quicker it is to be removed.
What
But-
leads to that not being maintained properly?
So
what
actually,
would cause you to not have those values right anymore? If you've
you
been nailing it board after board, all of a sudden you've got problems. What happened?
when you actually etch a copper panel into there, into the ammonium, it actually causes an exothermic reaction. The tank heats up. Inside of each etcher is actually a huge giant chilling station that you got to run these big chillers to. And it cools and keeps the bath at a certain level. So as you run panels, your tank's going to heat up. And then, it's a hot environment. Maybe it's 100 degrees outside and you have that. You're fighting against your chiller. You're fighting
Maybe
against.
the person running it smoking a cigarette.
That's irrelevant.
Just irrelevant, he says.
Yeah. It's for fume, just to make sure the fume extraction is working correctly. Yeah.
Yes.
Fume test. Yeah. But the mass, though, is, we used a 4-camera alignment system. And again, it's the same reason why I was so mad about your DigiKey, the drill holes on it, right? Because if your registration is off on your pinning holes, it's going to affect every single film that uses that going forward. And those layers that are now stacked, right? Say some panels are drilled accurately in the middle, they're gonna be exposed correctly, and then some panels that may be off registration could be exposed.
Did we reference the DigiKey ruler last week? Or
I'm not sure that we did. Maybe a little context. So,
Yeah.
Sean, would you call it a fit or a tantrum? One of the two. You pick the word, but he had an adverse reaction to Daniel's little promotional DigiKey ruler.
Yeah.
He assassinated the craftsmanship of said ruler.
Yeah. I said stick to selling components. That's exactly what I said.
I think they do. I think they do pretty well.
They do amazing. They're a great company. I love them.
All right.
They're
Thanks.
my go-to BOM source.
You might have just saved our sponsorship opportunity.
They should be so lucky.
Yeah, I mean, as to give the listening audience, there was a 1.6 millimeter hole drilled pretty well, and as the drill bits got smaller and smaller in size, the pads started shifting,
I think we did talk about
over to the left, over to the left, over to the left, over to the left, and then that's fine. You're still going to be an IPC spec, even up to class 3 with a good clearance, right? But as you get into a VIA range, right, to smaller, and as you have to remember too, this is panel based, right? So if your axis is drifting in your middle part or your lower part, your first drills, as it goes up progressively throughout, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So best case scenario, Daniel would have gotten the worst off alignment part, right? Worst case scenario, that was the best one, and it's just going to get more terrible from there. And this is catches my eye, because if I see that on a board, then I know I need to look at every single board, especially because that type of issue can happen. Where
that said, it's still pretty cool to see a line that tells you what it is in millimeters and then what it is in mils, and to see what the pitch is, in both metrics, and to see all the different 25, 12,
package sizes,
1208 or 1206, 0805, 0603, or down, all the way down for that comparison. Like, that's always like a really, especially for people who don't work with them all the time, it's kind of a helpful little guide just to show you how each one steps down in size, and by the end you're pretty small,
Elias actually sells a business, or I don't know if he makes a business card that has all that on there.
Yeah.
Oh, right? Yeah. Elias should show his business card. Do you have your business card handy?
Well, I don't.
I don't. You chump, I've got one of your business cards handy.
Mine's in a landfill in Detroit.
It sure is.
Let's see it. Oh, look at that.
Look at that. Yeah, mine's on my desk. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't throw it away.
The nice thing about that is it doubles as a self-defense implement. It's 6 mils, about as sharp as a razor blade. I used to hand those out quite a bit, but I worried about people cutting their finger on them.
Okay, so we've got this week's listener submitted questions. I think, Elias, you've got these ready to roll out, and then we will discuss who's the first one.
Yeah, so our first question is from Mr. Alex Norman, and you're going to hear his name mentioned a couple times today. That's not on accident. He is going to be our guest next week, so we thought we'd give him a little bit of love. Yes, sir. So we'll fire away with Alex's question. Thanks for the submittal.
Well, I want to thank you for letting me pose today's podcast question. So you said it could be personal or professional. So I do have one of each. My personal question would be just full name, address, mother's maiden name, and make of first car. I have a project I'm working on that would be very useful for. And then, of course, my professional question would be, why don't board assemblers offer testing? And by testing, I mean, why don't they offer functional testing? Why don't they have normally a testing department that they offer testing? So most of the board houses we work with, will offer some kind of just probe testing, or they'll offer an x-ray testing, but not functional testing, voltage-based or waveform-based. And so it takes a little while to find a board house that will actually offer functional testing. They have a test set up. They make a bed of nails. We pay an NRE of $3,500, $5,000, something like that, and then they implement a test for whatever module or whatever BMS we have. So that is my question. Why don't board houses offer functional testing?
All right, that's a good one, all right, that's a great question, and I've never been so happy that I'm not in the assembly space. So, Sean, Daniel, enjoy.
I want to hear Daniel's response first.
Perfect. Okay. We love the opportunity to provide testing. The interesting thing about his question is why doesn't everybody do it? Here's the thing, we are an extremely high mix, low volume shop. So a lot of these assemblies, well, all of the assemblies are custom, right? We don't make our own product. Everything we build is to customer specs for their specific purpose. It's going out into different applications, different environments, different expectations, different functions. I mean, to have equipment that would be a one size fits all for every single type of test, I mean, I don't even know that exists, and if you're running super low volumes like we are often, I mean, fortunately we're getting some mid to high runners too for us, so it's nice to have a mix. But when you have a high mix and many of them are low volume, the investment to properly test on a low run of board, if you're running 10 boards, if you're running 25 boards, how much can you invest into a specific custom made functional tester, So that's where the give and take is for us, what makes sense. So that's where sometimes if a customer does already have an established methodology of testing, we don't want to charge you to reinvent the wheel, give us your wheel and we'll start rolling, we'll just we'll follow your plan that works. Or if you don't have that plan and it makes sense for us to develop one for you and to just handle it from start to finish, we're happy to do that too. That just obviously does come at a price. So as long as the customer's ready for, the work that comes with making something perfectly suited for their assembly, then we're happy to do it. What's your opinion on those things, Sean?
Yeah, same thing. After 4 years of doing PCBA, I've actually only done 3 functional tests like that's been, and every single one of them was customer supplied, right?
Sure.
Because in order to do it, you'd have to know the schematic inside and out, right? You have to know what do you need to test and because anybody can get a diode to light up, right? But is it really supposed to be lighting up at this point and this time at this part of the sequence, and without knowing the schematic?
Does it have the right voltage, or is it going to blow too hot? Is it going to
just you name it, and then so you'd have to look at the schematic, and now at this point you're almost creating another board, right? This is another product that is going to test the validity. It's a big word for me, of the rest of the boards. And the 2 of them were go no go, right? One was pretty cool. It was a designer from the 70s, and he took a light bulb from his house and made this old lamp and turned it into whether the lamp would light up or not. So you plug the board in.
Yeah, we've got one of those.
Yeah,
Yep.
It was cool, man. I was
Mhm.
like, this is awesome. No, it was a connector we plugged in, plugged out, green light or no green light. And then this last one we got is pretty cool. It was actually it's for a garage door sensor, and you have to have a certain amount of pressure when the garage door goes down. So you run your functional test, and then you can see where the pressure range is, right? And then so you turn these potentiometers, and then once you get that into the
Yeah.
pressure that you want, and then you're good to go. That one is almost like the most important one to me, right? That we've done. The rest were I mean, I don't know about you, Daniel, but after running so many without a functional test, like I'm pretty confident if it's placed and the AOI passes it right and it's soldered good, like it should work, without the functional test. And but it comes down to cost.
You know
It
what's
really,
crazy? When we were looking at equipment and I was considering Europlacer, and we looked at we went took a day and got to go up to Omaha, Nebraska, drive a few hours away from me, and look at a customer of Europlacers that was running, an Ineo there, an Ineo 1, and we were looking at an Ineo 2, but it's the same platform, you just get excited to know that the one we were looking at would be even faster, or the one we were considering buying would be even faster than the one we were going to see in person,
Yeah.
But we show up to this little strip mall looking place. Like, I never would have expected to find this $1 million line, because you add up all these different machines together, you're looking at a pretty penny. You got, screen printers and conveyors and the pick and place and an AOI and reflow. And, you've got a lot of machinery there on an SMT line. But we show up to this little place and they've got this machine run. They believe so much in the repeatability and consistency of their product that they eventually stopped using their AOI. They just were like, what's the point? Like, there's never a problem. Like, it just doesn't need the inspection because we've never, like, we're the 1% or less that we find, we're just going to be, okay with.
Must be a simple board.
Why would
Pretty
you not
simple.
use it if you had it though? Does it
Time.
slow the process down?
Yeah.
Theirs
34
was batch. It wasn't inline, so it wasn't just like
Gotcha.
letting it continue down the line. It was a separate step that would require extra manual labor.
Yeah.
Who do we have for the second question? You've got that one ready, Elias?
Yes. So for the second question, we have Chad from Aqueous, and here's his question.
Okay, here's my question. It might be two questions. My first question is, where did the name Decode come from and the story behind it? My second question is more for each individual, and that would be, if there was one thing in your manufacturing process that you got to do over again, what would it be and what would you do different?
So the first one is
Great
that's-
question.
yeah, that's a good one there. So let's jump into that.
It's obvious, right? It was my idea.
Well, it depends. It depends on what the reception is of the name. So if it's widely accepted, obviously it was mine. If people don't like it, why'd you do that, Daniel?
Listen, I still claim it was Elias' idea, but none of it would have happened if I wasn't forcing you two to be social and talk to each other.
You think the Decode name was Elias's?
I do.
Was that thread deleted by Elias?
So I think it's clear we're not going to agree on who conceived the name, but maybe we can at least chat about why we picked the name or what we liked about the name. Kind of has a few different meanings, right?
There's a good chance people don't like it, so I think we should probably actually agree it was Sean's idea.
I'll take it.
No, Decode. So, as far as I remember, decodes are on Gerbers, right? So we see them all the time in assembly. Elias sees them all the time for figuring out aperture shapes and sizes. It's pretty synonymous to everything we do. I imagine decodes are all over board fab also, Sean?
No.
No? You don't
G-
you don't use the Gerbers to assign. You don't have the different shapes of the pads themselves on different Gerber layers assigned with decodes?
Not that I know of. I could be totally wrong on this though. And if I am, we're
There's
gonna
a good
edit it all.
chance.
We're gonna edit it all out. As far as I know,
Okay.
because you gotta remember too, we're going in the cam department, right? We're not We're just taking what you got
Mhm.
and stepping in, repeating. Really, that's the main thing we're doing. Copy and paste.
Right. The CAM department, exactly where decodes are used, right, Elias?
Exactly, yeah. And let's see. So I don't know. Have you guys ever seen 274 Gerber as opposed to 274X?
For
Yeah.
X, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
274D.
right. So what's
Never
the
seen
difference,
D.
Sean?
No idea, buddy. I just know one would work with the LDI and one wouldn't.
Aperture
One's
list is embedded in
deprecated.
X.
Say that again.
He said the aperture list is embedded in the X version. In the
I'm gonna try to export one tomorrow and see if I can prove you right.
He is right, because when I am creating a new layout, I don't have to have centroid data for where everything is if it's in 270x format.
Well, because
It's all there.
the other day, when I was designing my circuit board, when I export from DipTrace, you can choose 274, which is what we always used, and then 274X. And I just never did it but when I import into my CAM program, sometimes there's issues with that. So I'm gonna try and see if that helps actually.
It will.
It will.
Because like especially like a polygon shape or anything that's
Yeah.
oddball,
Anything non-standard.
yeah, it just comes in
Yep.
garbled, and then we got to clean it up. And that would be
That's
that would
what
be awesome.
Circuit Cam. Do you use Circuit Cam?
We do.
Yeah, that's what I remember before switching. Like that's, man, all the time. Even if it's just a diamond shape, if it's just a square on a 45, like it's just turns into this big blob in Circuit Cam. You're like, what happened?
Yeah.
Like even or sometimes even the circles for BGAs it wouldn't like, or I saw something else that would happen a lot for us would be the silk screen wouldn't have all of the layer edited out right. So the silk screen would actually be coming through on the paste layer also, and it just make the whole thing a big blob, unrecognizable blob, and you couldn't
Or-
even work with it.
Or a certain part of the silk was cut off, right?
Yeah.
Maybe on a big number like R1 would be like half the one is missing.
Yep. That happens all the time. So I think the other thing with decode was like we're trying to uncover the mysteries of electronics, right? And the assembly process, and how all three of our dark arts, interweave to form a functioning board.
Dark art. Let's be real though, it's because I'm near Detroit, so that's why we call it the decode.
Well, I thought it was
thought
because
we
I
all-
live in San Diego.
Thought we all agreed it was because my name's Daniel.
There you go. So the truth is somewhere in between.
Somewhere
Yeah,
in
there
there.
you go. Truth is somewhere in between. Okay, clear enough. Clear enough of an answer. Was there another part to that question?
Yeah, the second part was regarding for each one of us, what about our manufacturing process would we do over again given the chance? What do you got, Sean? You probably got a lot of regrets. What would you do different?
Yeah, I mean, I jumped into PCBA not knowing anything, right? So I would
What's changed?
totally do it. I would totally do it so differently. Where I would have bought my SPI day one. I waited 2 years and I had no clue what I was missing until I got one, right? Absolutely no clue. The amount of boards and money and rework that thing has saved me alone. Priceless. I would never run a shop without one again. And then I would probably go for, instead of the beast as Daniel calls it, the Inio 2, I go with a chip shooter like the A2 N1. That's what I would my ideal, right? Because then I can get the speed, and then I can have my huge matrix tray for these oddball components that I might not have a specific feeder for, or just in general. I feel like that's an amazing setup right there. So machine wise, I would definitely have purchased different. What I have now is great, right? It's just overkill on the front end when I'd rather be overkill on the back end of chip shooter first, put your little passes down, you're no problem, guys, and then use the higher, more costly equipment towards the end,
So I gotta ask you this because I struggle with this. Chip shooter versus pick and place. A chip shooter is always a pick and place, but a pick and place isn't always a chip shooter. Is that accurate?
There you go.
Or school me on that.
Yep, that's correct. A chip shooter is going to be your smaller components, which are generally much higher volume number of placements on the board. So if you focus a machine to only work on those, then it is extremely efficient at those. And so you're not making it switch tools to handle larger components also. You're just slamming as many of those small components down in as little of a time as you possibly can. Then he's saying he would have it send over to the next machine that can handle your larger and your odd form components, and it would be a more efficient, balanced process. I mean, that's essentially what
Right, the
we're
Enio 2
doing.
has two heads, right? So I mean, you're
That's essentially what we're
replicating
doing
that.
with an the machine's algorithm knows that it wants you to put all of your passives, all of your low, your smaller components on your first head, and then the larger odd form stuff on the second head. And sometimes you still have, depending on the component mix and number of placements, you may still have a bunch of 0402s or 0201s or whatever you're running over on the second head also to keep it at a 50%, because when you've got it running right, it will actually pretty much run in perfect tandem where the both heads and turrets finish populating the board they're working on at the same time, so that then the conveyors are working sync at the same time, and the machine runs along pretty efficiently that way.
Yeah, I got
So
spoiled with my first machine though. It was a Eco, and it has like a 4 or 5 foot matrix tray, man. It's huge, and we make all these custom carriers with FR4. So I would put all these oddball parts on there before I had the NT feeders and tube feeders, right? So that's why I like the Enio
The
1.
NT feeders on a Europlacer platform are bigger. They allow deeper pockets than like your regular feeders would. They let you handle wider and taller components, like
Giant
not just
component.
your 8/16s and 24 millimeter tapes, but
Yeah.
even 32, 44, 56. I mean, it keeps going. There's big ones on that.
And the height on them too, right? Like those big
Yep.
caps you could pick up with those NT feeders. And before we had that,
we have a big transformer that's like 15 millimeters tall.
Exactly. And that thing can handle it no problem, right? And before that though, we had to do matrix tray, and I'm just spoiled with that. I got all these trays, and there's times where you only have so many tubes feeders, right? And it's only for so many sizes. So that's why I like having a big matrix tray, and that the Enio 1 offers that still, right? With the upgraded, the Eco is, she's my baby. She's what I started with, but that's just
the
what
Enio
that's
2
what I do.
offers more speed, but the Enio 1 is so flexible. You have so much space to do a lot of different things with, however you want to configure it.
Yeah.
Here we are. We are not sponsored yet, at least anyway,
Yeah. I keep trying to get them to let me be the East Coast demo unit. And then they just send all their machines over to me, and then whenever they want tours, they can just come by. But nobody's biting.
Well, with the reach that this platform is going to have, I have a feeling they're going to come knocking real quick. By the time this hits the air, you'll probably already have the deal in place.
Yeah. Me in the Silicon Prairie.
That's right. We're about to be, as we're recording this, we still haven't released anything yet, but I think before we record our next one, we will have released one. So you're still catching us when we're humble and reserved, and right before the onslaught of applause and praise has really just started to soak in. And I feel like I'll still be able to stay pretty down to earth, and you won't detect much of a change from week to week with me. But I'm guessing Sean's going to be wearing a full mink next week, a full fur coat, maybe some extra jewelry, and probably wearing sunglasses the whole time.
You've seen my sunglasses. You know the level I take
Yeah.
it to.
Okay, Elias, I think you also have the clips queued for our final segment of this week's podcast, which would be the Best of LinkedIn, where we each have a submission that we picked for the content we saw on LinkedIn that tickled our fancy the most.
Yeah, so first up, we had Sean's choice. And this week, he selected a post by Peter. And Sean, you want to tell us about this post and why you picked it?
Well, there was like technical stuff that he was posting it for, right? But the main thing for me was the different sizes, right? And he get into detail of why they're different sizes, but I'm sure Daniel has so much experience with this too. You see 1210 package on the part, so you program it under the 1210 package, and then you go to run it, and then it's spitting out components, and you're like, why? This is a 1210. You look at the data sheet, and you're like, oh,
1210.
it's
Easy.
Yeah, right? And then it's like, okay, and then so now you got to teach a new package and then call it what it is. And the fact that like he was able to say, okay, now and I'm going to rename my packages that we created for this, right? So like maybe this is a 1210 letter number, and then call it that, and that way in the future. But to me, it would just address the pain point and explain why, for me, this is happening. Like, because it to me it should be
It's not
illegal.
random, and when you're an actual operator on a pick and place, it does feel random.
Mhm.
It's like, why is this? Is there not a standard? I thought the name of the package, by definition, tells you exactly what the size is. So how is there any variation within a 1210 package? It is kind of annoying when you see, from our end anyway, when you're trying to assemble something and you can't just see the package name and slap the, you know,
Yeah, and
corresponding package to that item and go
for
ahead.
those who are just listening and don't have the visual reference here, Peter's post had 1210 packages, and there's 4 different varieties, right? And it's kind of, if you imagine the family on the back of the SUV windshield that has dad, mom, and the kids, they're kind of that size, right? You've got a kind of short, skinny one, and then a little bit of a wider one, and they're all 1210 packages, right? But they're very different animals.
Well, is the footprint the same? Is that, the actual pads underneath and maybe the body,
Maybe the pitch, that'd be the only thing that could be the same.
That's a good question. Looking at the picture, it does look like the leads are spaced Yeah, the pitch of them is always going to be the same, looks like.
But the pick and place is going by X, Y, and Z dimensions, which is, it also takes into the footprint too, but it also takes into the component bodies as well.
Right,
Well,
so the
yeah,
centroid
absolutely.
could be the same for all of them, right? But the other parameters are definitely substantially different from looking at this.
Yeah, and you want your machine to say, hey, this is the wrong size for this part, right? You don't want it to just place some giant.
Yeah, if your package on your pick and place machine would allow all 4 of those variants and not kick it, then you've got your packages set up wrong as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, 100%. Especially your tolerances.
But there's other manufacturing reasons they do that, and I'm not smart enough to know all the reasons why, but he had different explanations of their volumetric capacitance and their DC bias rating, and the mixture of those 2 metrics kind of, for a designer, I'm speaking out of turn, but for a designer, those metrics determine which one is more applicable for their design than another.
And that's common knowledge, so we won't bore anybody with that.
Yeah. For coming from guys who lift things up and set them down, right? Like,
Okay, so
one.
Yep, thank you for that submission.
So moving right along to my choice, and I chose this week a post by the SMTA, and it was announcing the winners of the prestigious SMTA 40 under 40 program. And I'd be
Oh, I've
remiss to
heard of that.
not, yeah, I bet. I'd be remiss to not share that our very own Daniel Stanphill was selected as one of this year's 40 under 40 winners. So I begrudgingly pass my congratulations on to you, Daniel.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'd be lying if I didn't say it. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy.
Well, it's like part of the reason why, I even wanted to message you, just like your enthusiasm for this industry, and the short time you've been here, and then, the places that you want to go and the knowledge you want to learn. It's a refreshing kind of like fire under yourself too, of like, hey, you know what? I should try to be better. Hey, I should try to learn more. Maybe I don't know it all, and I don't know. It's well deserved. Congratulations. Circuit speaking coming up too, probably for you. So that's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's in all sincerity, congrats. I mean, that's pretty big to get that kind of recognition, and I know you're really humble and won't brag about it. So we'll do it for you. But good going,
I
bud.
certainly won't publicly. I'm happy to brag to you two privately, as you know. But one thing that's pretty cool about that is I think it's going to give us an opportunity. We're, crossing our fingers that all three of us are able to make it there. We may be able to do one of these live together in the same room, which only live in that sense that we're in the same room. There's no chance that we allow Sean a hot mic without editing first. So it's definitely still going to be heavily edited.
We might get more views that way though. So
we'd have to have that one time.
Yeah.
We'd have to have a dump button at least.
Cancel.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So congrats on that, Daniel. And as long as my petition and submission of your real birth certificate don't reveal your true age of 41, you should be fine.
Yeah.
It worked for me in Little League. So
yeah, the only 12-year-old with a goatee.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last but certainly not least for this week's Best of LinkedIn is a bit of a follow-up story. This was Daniel's choice. Chris Merrow from Europlacer. He had been embarking on a cancer ride, and so you want to share the follow-up story that he posted on LinkedIn, Daniel?
Yep, he was happy to announce that he was able to complete the entire ride, which was 162 miles, which is pretty crazy. So he made good on everybody's donations, and I just, again, super commendable and admirable that he did this and that he shared it with everyone. I know John Parada personally as well, his boss, and I was pretty gutted to learn of his diagnosis that he was suffering from that also. So, I think it was just, again, really cool that Chris did this, made it public. I hope they are both feeling all the love and support from the outpouring everyone gave them on LinkedIn and elsewhere. And hopefully the families affected by this ride and by it also feel the support, because when you're in the middle of something like this, it dominates your entire life, and it probably feels like you're alone quite often. And so when somebody like Chris and the other people involved do a ride like this to raise the awareness and raise money and try to help in the efforts to end this type of suffering, it deserves all the recognition it can get.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, it affects so many people, and not many people talk about it, I will say one thing, 162 miles, dude, I'm sore if I'm driving a car for 162 miles.
Same.
Right? I'm getting out of
You
the
should have
same,
seen,
dude.
right?
like when my wife and I have been married a while now, like 14 years, and when we were probably just 3 or 4 years into marriage even, we were like, hey, let's get some bikes, let's ride around town on some bikes. It's like the first hill we're like giving up pushing the bikes up the hill, just like gassed. like 162 miles. I think if I started right now, I, if I started training right now, I could be ready for a ride like that in 2043.
Yeah, I'm sore just reading that thing, dude. That's so long. So
And his
kudos.
lead up in training, I feel like we followed that on LinkedIn as well. It didn't seem like it was that long of a lead up to get to the point where he was able to successfully complete 162 miles. Like, man, that's just, I'm impressed.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah, great submission, me. Okay. I think, is there any more planned content that either one of you guys wanted to get to, or are we ready to let the listening audience go free?
So I think the one thing that I know we talked about doing was kind of shooting our release teaser to send out tomorrow that announces our first release. That's a lot of words that means nothing. We were going to shoot a teaser for the announcement of our first release.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just it, Sean yawning.
That would
Can we like do an official wrap up of this podcast and then work on shooting teasers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just we'll
Take it
pretend
away,
that
Daniel.
music could.
Thanks for
We'll pretend
tuning
that
in
music-
tonight for the Decode. My name's Daniel Stanphill, and I hope you enjoyed it.
All right, guys. Okay, guys. Well, I think this has been another fun episode, and I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I'm assuming, again, wild success. So, get in while you can. Appreciate it once again. Look forward to you guys tuning in again next week.